Hi, friends. In part one of human genetics, we looked at some vocabulary. Specifically, we looked at genotype, phenotype, and we began looking at dominant versus recessive. Dominant versus recessive, these should be familiar words to you guys. These describe how likely it is for a certain phenotype to be passed down from parent to offspring. Dominant alleles. If you don't have this in your glossary already, please go ahead and add it. Dominant alleles show their effect with only one copy of the allele. So, like I started to say in part one, before I got cut off, I do apologize about that. Let's say we have these two people here, our parents, right? And let's say that they're going to have an offspring, they're going to have a baby, and we want to know what color eyes that child will most likely have. Okay, well, just looking at this, not knowing anything specific about their genotype, we see here that brown eyes is dominant, blue eyes is recessive. So if you get one trait from mom and one trait from dad, you're going to get a trait for blue eyes from mom and a trait for brown eyes from dad. Well, the definition of dominant allele says that we're going to see the dominant phenotype, which again is the appearance, with only one copy of that allele. So if we have one brown dominant allele and one blue recessive allele, what color eyes will their offspring most likely have? If you said brown, you were correct, because if we got one allele, and again, we don't know the genotype, we'll talk about that in a moment. If we got one dominant allele from dad, one recessive allele from mom, then the dominant is, again, kind of like a bully. He's going to push the recessive allele out of the way and say, hey, get out of here. I'm going to decide what eye color we're going to have. And it's going to take over and dominate, and that child will have brown eyes. Now, recessive alleles, you would need to have two copies of the recessive alleles in order to be able to see that phenotype. So in order for this person here to have an offspring, theoretically, the only way, we're going to talk about Punnett squares here in just a moment, but without any knowledge about Punnett squares, theoretically, this person with blue eyes, so they have the recessive allele, they would need to have a child with somebody else that also had blue eyes, or at least had an allele for blue eyes that could be passed down to an offspring, okay, in order for their child to have blue eyes. Okay. So we have certain traits or certain genes are dominant, some are recessive. Go ahead and pause the video here and take a look at the different genes and whether they're recessive or dominant. Kind of compare them to yourself. Which dominant genes do you have? Which recessive genes do you have? And then we'll move on. Okay, more vocabulary. Homozygous dominant. Homozygous dominant. Be sure to add this to your vocabulary. Okay, so homozygous dominant carries two copies of the same dominant allele. Okay, let's break up this big scary word, homozygous, and make it a little more friendly, something that we can understand. So the prefix here, we have homo. Now in English, I know you guys are studying prefixes and suffixes, and hopefully you are familiar with the prefix homo. Homo means same. Okay, so if we know that homo means same, and we know what dominant means that that's the trait that's the big bully, right? Like if this dominant gene is present, then we're going to see the dominant phenotype. then this means that we have two copies of the same dominant allele. So that means, and dominant alleles are always going to be represented by capital letters. So an example of a genotype that is homozygous dominant is capital B, capital B. Homozygous because they're the same, homo meaning same, dominant meaning we have capital letters, so we have two capital letters, two capital B's. And again, that's going to be for the dominant allele. And in the case of Mendel's pea plant flowers, we know that the purple color was dominant, the white color was recessive. So if capital B, big B, equals purple, the purple allele, we know that in this case, two big B's is going to give us a purple flower. Okay, homozygous recessive. Again, go ahead and add this to your glossary. Homozygous recessive carries two copies of the same recessive allele. Homo meaning same. Recessive meaning that we have that recessive allele. And recessive alleles are going to be represented by lowercase letters. And again, for either of these, it doesn't matter what letter we use. They use the letter B here. We could use the letter A or the letter F or E. It doesn't matter. But here they chose to use the letter B. So homozygous recessive, homo meaning same, recessive meaning that we have lowercase letters. Homozygous recessive, we are going to have two lowercase recessive alleles. And because we do not have a dominant present, there is no capital B here, we do not have a dominant allele, all we're going to be left with is that recessive phenotype or that white allele, that white colored flower. Okay, so there's one more vocab left that we need to talk about, heterozygous. Okay, so we have a new prefix, hetero, meaning different. Okay, so this means that the alleles are going to be different. It means we're going to have one dominant and one recessive, so it carries two different alleles. And if you see in the example, I have one capital and one lowercase. The example over here, one capital, one lowercase, hetero meaning different. But because we have one dominant, one recessive, because we do have at least one dominant allele present, that flower is going to have the dominant phenotype, the dominant color, and it is going to be purple. Okay? All right, guys. I think I'm going to stop us right there for now, and then I will go ahead and do a new video talking about Punnett squares. Okay, so stay tuned for part 3.